Welcome everyone, herzlich willkommen. Today we want to have a bilingual session of sorts. I'm going to introduce the following book to you. Das Geld der Dichter, The Money of the Poets by Frank Berger, a German historian whose book was published in 2020 and I was lucky to get a copy of it. The book presents 71 biographical sketches, as it were, of income and wealth and how people lived at the time of Goethe. So some of the best known names of the German speaking world, Goethe, Fichte, Schelling, Schiller, Hegel, etc., how much money they really had and how they lived. Something that's never talked about, because we all assume that poets either and thinkers, etc., and of course also musicians, there's a Beethoven is in there and Mozart, etc., they either live from Luft und Liebe or just the art, or that there are poor artists, etc. But it's striking what you learn is that some of them did not do well, but many of them came from money, and most of them, Hegel did not come from money perhaps, but they did earn quite a bit. So I'm going to go over some of the annual salaries of some of the biggest names from the Goethe era in the beginning. Then I'm going to mention who is in that book, and I think it's unfortunate it's now out of print, so I'm lucky to have a copy of it. And there's no, as far as I can tell, there's no English version of this. It would be well worth to have this translated. Quite a few images in here as well. For example, here the Stift in Tübingen, where, because Ananke so decided, Hoelderlin, Hegel and Schelling were roommates during their studies of theology. Unfortunately, of Protestant theology, of course, but you can't have everything. So let me begin. If you'd like to guess, what do you think? So in euro terms, yeah, how much did Hegel earn in 1816 as a professor in Berlin? What do you think? In thalers, it was 2,000. Now, 2,000 thalers in today's euro terms, and mind you, the euro is stronger than the US dollar. Hegel earned per year 400,000 euros. But when he died, his widow was left with nothing, because the family spends every last penny every year, and she could only survive because the publisher paid her royalties every year from Hegel's publishings. Now, Goethe, as you might know, came from an upper middle class family from Frankfurt, not the richest family. The Rothschilds were definitely already richer at the time in Frankfurt. Now, how much do you think Goethe spent as a student every year? 1,200 florins, which translates to 140,000 euros per year. So that's just what Goethe spent every year as a student when he studied law, jurisprudence. So, who else? We've got Herder here. Herder earned 240,000 in Weimar as a priest. This, of course, could lead to someone, not me, but to someone else, make a remark on Protestant priests and their relationship with money. But that would be uncalled for, of course. Unseemly. Schiller earned 300,000 euros a year in 1802, which he could barely scrape by on. Just so you know. Now, Goethe, who was a big spender, he spent more than he started in Weimar. He was only able to live the lifestyle that he wanted to live because he had inherited enough. He spent double the money than what he actually earned, which was possible because of his inheritance. He made about 2.4 million euros on his autobiography Dichtung und Wahrheit oder Aus meinem Leben, Poetry and Truth. And he earned in his final year 600,000 euros. But here is the absolute top earner is Schelling. Schelling, as a professor in Berlin in 1840, earned, you'll never guess this. Anyone here who wants to guess how much he earned? Just guess, how much did Schelling earn as a professor of philosophy, mind you, per year in 1840? In euro terms or dollar terms, today's terms. 1 million euros. So this is all listed here. Yep. That's 5,000 thalers. So what I'm going to go over now is a list. I won't mention every single of the 71 names here, but I'll mention some of the best known names. If you can get your hand on this book, it's a wonderful book. That's Geld der Dichter, I say it again, published by a small publisher in, I think, Frankfurt. The author's name is Frank Berger. So we find in here the family Brentano. We find here, of course, Goethe, von Hardenberg or Novalis, Hegel, Herder, Hoelderlin, who lived off his mother, and a patron for most of his life, Schiller, the Schlegel brothers, and Friedrich Schlegel especially kept asking for money from Novalis, sometimes up to 40,000 euros. And Novalis was helpful enough, let's say, naive enough to help out. But at least Friedrich Schlegel, after Novalis' early death, helped get Novalis' works published. So we do have to thank him for that. Herder, I think I mentioned him. We also find, for example, Johanna Schopenhauer in here. Schopenhauer himself is not mentioned because Schopenhauer is not part really of the Goethe era. But as you might know, Schopenhauer inherited some money from his father, who was a tradesman, and who sorry, 1 second. So Schopenhauer's father was a merchant who left the family some money, and also was able to fund Schopenhauer's Grand Tour when Schopenhauer was a bit younger. But as far as I remember, Schopenhauer ripped off his mother and his sister when his father died, so that he got more out of the inheritance than everyone else. And then, of course, Schopenhauer goes on to blabber on about compassion and how we're all equal. If I look at this animal over there, I just see a suffering being. Oh, yeah. And then you look at what he actually did and you realize, no, that is all just for show. So it's quite interesting to read this because you get to learn about the relationships these people had. Because as you might know, many of them were friends, Friedrich. Schiller and Goethe, of course, were good friends, Schlegel and Novalis, etc. But also Herder and Goethe had a falling out because Herder also seemed to have been a bit, felt perhaps a bit left behind, financially speaking. So Fichte is in here, the Grimm brothers, the Humboldt brothers. Wilhelm von Humboldt, it's mentioned that he had a concubine that he paid about 2,000 euros or so per month to keep her quiet. Schelling, of course, Friedrich Schleiermacher. Cotta is in here, one of the great publishers. Bertuch, also a very successful entrepreneur. Caspar David Friedrich is mentioned, Beethoven, Mozart, and Schubert. So, and a few others that I won't go over here. And I'm now going to go over some of these figures. For example, let's begin, why not, with Goethe, who, as I mentioned before, came from an upper middle class family, then was one of 3 members at the insignificant Duchy of Weimar, as a member of the state council, where he earned about 1,200 thalers per year, but he spent about 3,000 per year. So that's what, 500,000 euros roundabout that he spent per year. If I just look at the list again, yeah, that would be about that amount of money. So quite astonishing to be able to spend that much money at that time. It's rare that anyone who earns that much money today. People who work in tech, perhaps, partners at law firms. But so that is, I think it's important to know this, because we should not assume that there has ever been a poor artist or a poor poet. Novalis, who died young, of course, his real name is Friedrich von Hardenberg, so he was noble. His father was what we might refer to perhaps as landed gentry. He was a Gutsbesitzer, and also his father was an expert, we might say, in salt mining, and Novalis also had a day job. He worked as he studied law, and then he worked as a risk assessor, we might say, perhaps, in mining as well. Of course, he had to suffer a lot too. By the way, we're going to read some Novalis, because we're going to read Goethe's Faust at my upcoming Goethe course. Maybe you should do this if you haven't done so yet. The course will begin very likely now on the 13th of April 2025, and we'll meet for a good 2.5 months. If you haven't done so yet, go over here. This link that I'm showing you now, it's in the description of this video as well, and register your interest to be the first to know, to learn, when we open enrollment for this course. We're going to, if you read German, you should of course read Goethe's Faust in German. But we'll of course have the discussion in English, and I think that there are wonderful translations out there, one by Walter Kaufmann, for example, and a few others. I'll supply different translations. There's some from the 19th century as well. You should pick the one that speaks to you the most. And as with this, addressing though the philosophical and theological content, really, of the thought of Faust and this most modern myth, maybe the only myth we really have in modernity, you shouldn't think that you can't read it in English. I think it's especially because how we're going to read it is very possible, and you won't be missing out on much. If there's really something that doesn't translate into English from the German, I will make mention of this and try and give descriptions that might be a bit longer than a translation that follows the verse, etc. But anyways, so in 1798, back to Hardenberg, back to Novalis. In 1797, his brother dies, and his 15-year-old fiancée dies as well. And he begins to call himself Novalis around this time. Around the same time, he had already at this time lived for 8 years on his father's dime, And he's also too good to his friends. Schlegel, I mentioned before, there's a few others who I won't mention here, who keep coming back to him and ask him for money. And he, good-hearted and maybe naive as he was willing to gift the money, and never saw any return for it. So that is quite striking, especially when you read some of the letters from Friedrich Schlegel to Novalis about their deep friendship, etc. If you want to be cynical, then you could read something into that, why Schlegel was so concerned, let's say, with his good friend Novalis. Maybe 40,000 euros worth of concern or so. Well, mention Hegel. Herder is an interesting case, given that he was a Pfaffe, as we might say, a priest, of course. And now the two people who know German will know what I mean. What we mean by a Pfaffe when we speak of a Protestant Pfaffe. Sometimes the cliche is true, Sometimes it's true. Now, Herder did not come from much money. It was certainly not the same level as Goethe, but he did not come from poverty either. He was in, basically, to quote here from this book, he was almost permanently in, his finances were almost permanently in bad shape. And not only that, his second son, August, as we learn here, had 3,000 thalers of debt, but not just any debt. Guess what kind of debt? The worst kind of debt you can have. Not credit card debt, that's pretty bad too, but nein, Spielschulden, gambling debts. 3,000 thalers. Again, that's around 500,000 euros in today's terms. So this is Herder's son, a good Christian, of course, goes gambling. So his son August was a squanderer, really. And when Herder himself died, Johann Gottlieb Herder, this is whose wonderful book I have here, Ideen zur Philosophie der Geschichte der Menschheit. You should read Herder. You should never conflate the finances with the ideas or anything. Herder was a wonderful thinker, don't get me wrong, but he left behind 4,400 thalers of debt. And but when Goethe died, I think he left behind something like 1 minute. 1 second. I don't want to make anything up. Like Beethoven left behind 1.2 million euros. And I can't find Goethe now, but I think it's high up. It's quite substantial. Friedrich Hoelderlin now, who, as you might know, lived for most of his life, or for a long time of his life, in Tübingen, basically locked himself in a tower, which you can still visit today. I've been there many times. He was good friends with Hegel. He actually also, as is reported here, helped Hegel get a position as a teacher, a tutor, for example. But he was also, and especially, dependent upon his mother, from whom he received quite substantial financial support. And when she died, she left him 3,200 gulden, which I don't know right now how much that would be in thalers. Again, it should be substantial. And of course, also his relationship with Sinclair was helpful, let's say, in supporting him. So, yeah. That's Hoelderlin. I'd like to move on to Schiller, perhaps next. Should we go to Schiller? Schiller, why not? Golden are more precious than thaler. Thank you very much, Herr Schulze. That's good to know. If you know how much that was, it was 3,200 gulden. So I would recommend if you reach and try and get a copy of this book. I think there should probably be one. You should be able to find used copies. Now, Jena, Schiller was probably saved, financially speaking, because he was appointed außerordentlicher Professor, extraordinary professor of philosophy in Jena. He had to pay, this is also maybe quite relevant, he had to pay 50 thalers in fees to be, well, to receive his promotion, his PhD, his title, as it were. And the Count of Sachsen-Weimar paid him from January 1719 an annual salary of 200 thalers. That's what I mentioned in the beginning of this year, which again is, well, it would be about then 40,000 or so in the beginning, but this was then increased over time because Schiller himself, as is mentioned here, one second, Schiller himself, though, needed at least 450 thalers a year, as in 1790. So he was in troubled financial situation for quite some time, and supported here by Herzog Friedrich Christian von Schleswig-Holstein with 1,000 thalers per year for 3 years from 1791 onwards. So very often, for example, when it comes to take the example of Caspar David Friedrich. Friedrich was supported, didn't come from that much money, but also had had difficulty getting ahead in life and just paying his bills, but was lucky because he was put in contact with the Tsar at the time, and the Russian poet Vasily Shukovsky, when he came to his gallery or his studio, bought several of his works and also then helped thereby, and again later on, supported Friedrich's work. And it's also sometimes quite striking is that what seems to happen often at the same time is that you begin to, for example, Friedrich, you begin to sell something, and then the count or the duke or whoever becomes, or the prince become aware of you and make them professor or give them a position with a fixed and stable salary. And another extreme case in the exact reverse direction is, of course, is Fichte, who, as you might know, was fired from his position. Let me find him. Where's Fichte? There's Fichte. The poor philosopher Johann Gottlieb Fichte. So he actually did come from poverty and remained poor throughout, not his entire life, but never really got to where Goethe was. And when he was let go and he was fired, frankly, from his position in Jena, he went to Berlin, where he taught privately, and where he taught privately. He taught the Wissenschaftslehre, which should be somewhere here. I've got not entirely certain where it is right now, but as you might know, Fichte believed that you have to write the Wissenschaftslehre again and again and again every year. So he did that, and he also presented and lectured on the Wissenschaftslehre, his newest lectures every year, for which he took private tuition. So he did what some of us are doing today already, but he also was, and this is perhaps important, he had a day job, which was, let me try and find it. He worked for his brothers, I can say as much. Because after having been let go, having been made redundant, having been fired from Jena for suspicion of being an atheist, etc., he became sort of a marketing expert for his brother's company on textile, Bandweberei in German. So he did market research. He conducted any kind of market research, marketing, etc., and helped in that way to, his two brothers' company, but also to support himself financially. I will skip over the Brothers Grimm and maybe end on Hegel. So Alexander von Humboldt is also very interesting because Alexander von Humboldt, of course, inherited a lot of money, but spent almost all of it on his travels to South America. So he invested what he had inherited on his anthropological journeys to South America. Okay, Hegel is on 195. He's here described as the lebensnahe Denker, which perhaps some might disagree with. Now, what some might not know is that it took Hegel a bit of time to get to where he was in terms of being a professor. He did not become a professor immediately after his studies. He first worked as a Privatdozent, but he also worked as in 1806, the Phenomenology of Spirit was published. In 1805, he was first made a professor in Jena, paid 100 thalers per year, so that should be 20,000 euros, I think. Might be wrong. And Goethe knew about the financial hardship of Hegel, and also made sure that sometimes he would get a bit of a, let's say, a bonus or something. So, but he also taught privately, not only as a Privatdozent, but I mean not only as an in-house tutor, but also taught privately at a collegium, or let's say at a college, and had about 10 to 30 listeners, quite a substantial number, and took 3 Laubtaler per semester from his students. This was an ordinary thing, really. I have to say. Someone's gifting memberships. I'm not sure who. Thank you very much, Harris. I didn't know that was possible. So, oh yeah, you might know this, of course, that Hegel had a son out of wedlock, a bastard son, and Ludwig was his name. He paid his mother 50 gulden per year, or in the year 1811. And in 1817, Ludwig was finally taken in by Hegel himself. He was also for some time an editor at at a newspaper in Bamberg, which is in the north of Bavaria, not too far from Bayreuth. But 1 second, I want to get the quote correctly. So he left Jena for that position and accepted the editorship of the Bamberger Zeitung in 1807, which paid him 1,300 gulden, but he was also, that included an apartment free of charge, and he didn't want anything more than this. That would be the dream, wouldn't it, to be an editor for a normal newspaper, if those still exist. And he writes to Niethammer in 1807, "Was will ich in dieser Welt vielzeitliches mehr? What else which temporal things do I want more in this world?" So he was still, I think, employed in Weimar, if I follow this correctly here, but also mostly be an editor. And he also, in the same letter to Niethammer, mentioned, "Das Bier ist hier gut." So he wanted to stay in Bamberg because, why? The beer is good. However, later on, he had a bit of not of a falling out with anyone, but there was too much censorship, you see, same issue as today, perhaps. And, so he left the position again and started writing reviews of books. He then became a director or headmaster at the Aegidian Gymnasium in Nuremberg, for which he earned 900 gulden plus 100 gulden, or even a free apartment, depending on what he took, which is not mentioned here as far as I can tell. So I won't go over his private life. I don't think that's very important, who he got married to, etc. But he made a good he got lucky there, let's just say. So in 1816, as I mentioned before, he was then made professor in Berlin, for which he earned in the beginning 1,300 Gulden, or then 2,000 thalers, let's say, and was able to live a good life, and also, though spent most of it. Hegel, I'm just quoting this now directly from the German, trying to translate it as good as I can. Hegel lived a good life in his Berlin years, because during his death, or at his death, not during his death, after his death, all they could find was 154 thalers. So again, he earns 2,000 thalers per year for 15 years and puts aside nothing. So, oh yeah, cheers to anyone who's having a beer now, because you are inspired by the spirit of Hegel. You should start drinking. People don't drink and they don't smoke anymore. It's terrible. Drink and smoke. Alles langweilige Menschen, that's what Helmut Schmidt once said. Do you remember the German chancellor who smoked for 80 years of his life and died at, 95, 96, 97? However old he got. Smoked menthol cigarettes until the day he died. Smoked everywhere, absolutely everywhere. At the theater in Hamburg, in his hometown, it's completely verboten to smoke, of course. They brought him an ashtray so that he could smoke in the first row. He smoked in television sets, he didn't care. And he once said, die Menschen heute trinken nicht und rauchen nicht, alles Langweiler. The people today don't drink, they don't smoke, they're all boring. So cheers, Prost, chin chin, salute, etc. So again, Hegel makes 400,000 euros a year when he dies of the cholera. It's not probably not true, but let's just say he died of the cholera, which is the legend. He leaves 150 thalers, a few thousand. So his widow, Marie, had to sell most of their stuff, which earned her about 600 to 8,000 600 thalers, not 1,000, that was wrong, sorry. But she also, luckily, received a pension from the University of Berlin at 640 thalers, again. However, she so there was no debt, at least. He didn't leave her any debt. But she, Duncker, the publisher, Duncker and Humblot until today, an important German academic publisher, helped her out basically and paid her 4,000 thalers in advance, a few days after Hegel's death, for the Gesamtausgabe, for the collected works, about 20 volumes here. So she got at least a little bit out of that relationship with Hegel, to put it extremely crudely. So Prost, etc. Thank you again, Harris. I think that was all you. Again, if you are interested in reading on Hegel, let's see if you people have registered you. So the way this works, if you're new to this, you just leave me your email address. We're beginning on the 13th of April, which allows us, the reason why I'm beginning in mid-April is we're going to read Faust's encounter or Faust's Spaziergang on Easter Sunday. We're going to read that on Easter Sunday. So, which is one of the most significant scenes in the entire play, of course, because that might be the one moment where he could come back to Christianity, or to at least, a different life, obviously, but he doesn't. So on the 13th, we're going to read the Zueignung, the dedication, then, of course, also the prologue in heaven, and on the theater stage, and probably also, that's for the first session, probably also Faust's encounter with the spirit of the earth, which may be taken from the Kabbalah. So what will be interesting during the Faust course is to see, because it's impossible to find all the different references that he makes. And so, all of you will know different things. So this will be able to bring all of this together, bring all our different ideas together, and try and find find a coherent way of reading the text. I also think that Mephistopheles is likely Hermes. I found a very old paper on this, which I find the most convincing. Mephistopheles is not the devil. That's important. It's not Satan. He's a little helper devil. So he's not necessarily, he's not to be conflated with here, good old Paradise Lost. Is quite different. And yeah, so the way this works, you give me your email address. We'll email you in a couple of weeks when we open early enrollment, then we open official enrollment. It's about, I think it's going to be a 10-week course or so. And as I said, on Easter Sunday, we get to read together Faust's Easter Sunday stroll, and on the day of the resurrection, as you all come back from Mass, of course, and Frühschoppen, if you know what that is. Okay. So, by the way, if you're interested, there's also I went to Rome a week ago for a very brief time, just a day really, and the only reason I went was to see the Italian Futurism exhibition. So that's coming up end of March if you want to spend an intense weekend reading some of the manifests by the Futuristi. There's not just one, there's several, and I have them all here in Italiano. The language of the seminar, of course, is English, not Italian, but if you read Italian, wonderful, you can get the same book by Abscondita. We're going to read the Women's Manifesto, a wonderful text. So much more radical than anything any feminist has ever written. Or any of the lot, the few past decades who are still around, like Butler, etc. is also boring and benign and bourgeois. So utterly boring. And so timid and benign, really harmless. Can we please also have a seat at the table? Can I please also smoke cigarettes? Or can I please also be a consumer? Can I just maybe choose my gender? Blah, 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 blah. It's so boring. Isn't it so boring? I think it's so boring. And utterly benign, inconsequential, because nothing it's formless, phlegmatic, etc. Anyways, good. So, I hope to... Well, there's more people than I expected, by the way, for a spontaneous stream. Again, I recommend this book. I don't know the author. I don't think it's still in print. If you can get a used copy of it, do so. It will give you many insights. But what I want to, really say though, is if you're young and you want to write, which you should do, it shouldn't just remain as an empty dream. You should actually do the work and write poetry, and start publishing. Don't hunt for a publisher. They're all crooks. Get the word out. but do not believe that there are really any poor poets or artists out there. That is a phantasma. It's fiction. It is ultimately fiction. There are a few exceptions, of course, but on the whole, and this is true, by the way, also in academia, only if you already come from at least some money in the background can you actually make it in academia. Because there will be moments when you don't have an income, but you still have to live in a place like, I don't know, Boston, etc. So I can give the exact title, Herr Schulze, telling you again, Das Geld der Dichter, 71 in Goethe-Zeit und Romantik, 71 biografische Skizzen über Einkommen und Auskommen. Ja. The publisher is Waldemar Kramer. The author is Frank Berger. Frank Berger. So in English, that would be The Money of the Poets in the Goethe era and the Romantic era. 71 biographical sketches on income and wealth of the mentioned figures. And here's a quote from Goethe, which I don't know where it's from, but apparently he said, wer sich aufs Geld versteht, versteht sich auf die Zeit. So whosoever understands money also understands time. And die Zeit is, of course, in English, in German could also be something like era or epoch. So to take this a bit further, in our epoch, in our time, in our age, we have a certain monetary system called fiat money. Now we have looming so-called digital currency, CBDCs, etc. You need to know what money is, how it works, even as a thinker and as a poet and a painter, etc. There's this old motto that you should never forget. Even if you don't have investments, you also have an investment. So don't only dream, be realistic. It is fundamental. And of course you should never, man sollte sich nicht vergelden. Yeah? So money is not an end in itself. Aristotle already knows this. Of course, we live in a time where money is the end all, be all, but money is not an end in itself. It can't be, because it's potentially infinite. But it is a means. And if you read book 4 of the Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle, you should know also that Aristotle is not an enemy of money, but that to be generous, to be able to be generous, etc., there needs to be wealth, but you need to be able to spend wealth good. So Chin is here. It's good to sort of see you. I'm not sure what you're referring to when you say this was definitely better than my day job. Do you mean Fichte, or I don't know? Let me know what you're referring to. I'll be here a couple more minutes. So let me just mention this again. Faust course is coming up in exactly 4 weeks. We're going to start 1 week before Easter Sunday. On Easter Sunday, we'll have the chance to read Faust's Easter Sunday stroll or walkabout, his Spaziergang. On Easter Sunday, we'll also include a couple of other scenes, of course. On Easter Sunday, importantly, his pact with Mephistopheles, who we're going to try and find out who he is. Who is Mephistopheles? Who is Faust? Why are there two souls in his chest? What are these two souls? Why does he say that allein mir fehlt der Glaube, that he lacks faith? So we're going to read Faust. I will make the suggestion that it's a post-Christian work. Of course, if you disagree, you should do so, but you should do so you should do so backed by the text itself. I believe that Faust wants to go, and Goethe himself, of course, wants to go beyond Christianity. So, Chin, I hope your day job is good, but you are very close to what makes this time in your job. And you see, in anything you do, I did once, I can tell you all, this is 15 years ago. I was an intern at a state bank, I'll put it like that, in Munich, of the Bavarian state. I was a student at the time in Italy, went back home and worked over summer as an intern at a state bank. And the things I saw at the time, but this is 2010, about evaluations of sustainability and people cheating on loan applications, making up companies to get loans from the Bavarian state in the sustainability sector. But also, so certain other aspects of the financial world which I had not known of before, of course, is invaluable because you see what is. And what is, you can't change. This is our time. You have to make do, you have to make sense of with the time, with the age in which you've been thrown into. So what do you do, which is, you're broadly speaking in finance? You're at the pulse, really, of this age also. And you should not underestimate the importance of living a full life, which is to say that there's I think the vita contemplativa, vita activa distinction is misguided. I will also, this will be in my Aristotle book, which will be out in early May. It's written, it's done. I'm just waiting for the first copies. I'll go over it again, make sure that there's as many spelling mistakes, etc., whatever could go wrong, okay, and then that everything's basically good enough, and that will be out then in early May. I think, for example, Aristotle specifically would argue that the life of arete, which is what usually we would refer to as the active life, leads to, for some, to the highest life, which is the life devoted to theoria and to nous, the life of the mind, as it's usually called. You need to be able to live both. Goethe is the best example. Goethe was a theater director. He was a Staatsrat of sorts. Let's see, he was a chancellor. That's the wrong title. Doesn't come to me at the moment. For the Duchy of Weimar. He was a poet. He worked on the Faust his entire life. But he wasn't entirely terrible with finances. So he was a politician. He had to wrap his head around, for example, the silver mines, the silver mining industry, whether it would make any sense to reopen the silver mines. You absolutely must not run my work through AI, and I'm going to block you. Who are you? Who are you? What do you want from me? Awful people. And it's always this, oh, I love your work. Here's something awful. Someone wants to run me through an intimate AI. Go to hell. No. This is my copyright. If you do that, you get into trouble. Seriously. I will sue you. I will. Okay, so on a lighter note, and you are now forever blocked, by the way. You should, if you are a creator of any sort, what you should do, by the way, hygiene is very important. Anyone who comes across as weird and awkward in a comment, especially a first-time comment, immediate block, immediate. You must not wait
No. You have to block immediately. So Goethe is the best example, I think, or one of the best examples of someone who spends an entire life in vicinity to what is, but also devotes to what is actual, etc. And also devotes, of course, his life to the higher, to the highest, to the divine, to poetry, to art. His entire life, to quote Safransky, is an artwork. Kunstwerk des Lebens. His life is a Gesamtkunstwerk. So don't forget that. Try and live up to those examples that we have. Okay. Good. So I hope to see you at my Faust course. Head over to... One second. So head over here. Register your interest. And also I hope to see you at my Futurism seminar, which is on the 29th and 30th of March. That is a Saturday and a Sunday. We're going to meet from 5 to 8 p.m. UK time, which I think is 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, if I'm not entirely mistaken. So go over to this website, which is in the link, which is in the chat. Sorry, the link to it is in the chat. And if you scroll down, you can sign up here. We're going to record these sessions for the group, so you have access to those afterwards as well. And we're going to read at least 3 of the manifests. And also, we are going to look at some of the artwork of the Futuristi, some by Balla. We will look at divisionism, why they despised, for example, Impressionism, because Impressionism fails to give form to what is, which was also the great talent of Goethe, to give form to life, to give poetic form even to the most benign or the most mundane. That was Goethe's great talent. And the Futuristi really wanted to give form to modernity, which you may witness here, for example. Yeah. Rather than falling for the trap of neoclassicism and just rehashing, they wanted to burn down all libraries, academies, museums, etc. Wanted to free language from grammar before any such figures as Derrida came along and pretended they were very avant-garde, which they were not. I mean, if you know anything about philosophy, then you know that what Derrida tried to do, the sophists tried to do, and so also the misguided followers of Heraclitus, etc. So nothing new here. But the Futuristi, they were new. Because they actually, as the only movement, I guess, who really took modernity seriously and wanted to give form only to what is modern. So that's why they matter. They're never discussed. I'm very glad to see that Italy had this exhibition for at least only 3 months, but still, and also without any nonsense around. It's just sachlich, factual. These are the artworks, and no nonsense around it. So that was wonderful to see that that's still possible. Not so much possible in other countries, of course, where everything has to be bracketed and couched in a certain way. But yeah, so I hope to see you at this seminar as well as my Goethe course. So stop sharing now. Thank you very much indeed for listening. It's now 80 people on Twitter, which is good to see. Always a good idea, though, to come over to YouTube. This time was the first time that the Twitter chat actually worked. Yeah. Okay. So thank you again. Good night. Good day. Good morning.